Hi everyone, thanks for joining and glad to have this opportunity from Product School for us to discuss about getting your first product management job in 2021. I'll start with giving some context on my experiences and where this content comes from. I studied electrical engineering from IIT Kanpur and did my MBA from UCLA. I transitioned from engineering to product management in 2016 and I'm currently a product manager at Twilio. When I was struggling to find the right product management job, I experimented with a few job hunt frameworks and looked at what worked in the real world, and then also leveraged these to mentor other product management aspirants and have the opportunity to keep iteratively improving these frameworks and seeing what works, what doesn't work. And so today we'll be covering some of these tips that I'd like to share with all of you and hope that that helps you in your search. The slides are intended to be light in information, but also we have a lot of content that we'll be covering, and you'll find a lot of supplemental information in the speaker notes that you'll have access to later on. If you have any questions, or if you didn't, because you didn't understand anything, or you want me to explain something in more detail in my newsletter, feel free to add questions on Slido at 1818265 or the QR code. What can you take away today? Um, Three things: process, prioritize, practice. Treating the job search as a marketing funnel, optimizing each step, prioritizing how much effort you spend in each step, but also looking at a list of companies and ranking them and so on. Practicing to show your value addition to the companies and bringing innovation to the table in your case interviews. So process, prioritize, practice. Let's start with the process. Um, Job hunt is an emotional journey. There are a lot of ups and downs, and there's a lot of stress. And to be able to reduce some of the stress and gain some objectivity, think like a product manager. Think about it as a marketing funnel to acquire customers, and that could help reduce objectivity, increase objectivity, reduce stress. Uh, Other slides won't be this colorful, but this is to show you how an example of how I used to um, measure my own progress on a weekly basis to see how am I doing on each of these steps and re-evaluate how much effort I should be spending on in the next week on each of these. We'll cover through all of these, we'll walk through them as we go. The last four that you see are explicitly around interview preparations, so we'll cover that. Then before that, it's all about getting interviews. Let's start with having a list of prioritized companies that are your target companies. Build this list by looking at broad sources like Crunchbase, Capital IQ, or VC portfolios, and then rank them by looking at a bunch of metadata. The ranking is so that you can put in a lot of effort for companies which are top priority for you, like networking a lot there, finding a bunch of referrals. And for the lower priority companies, you don't spend that effort, but you do go ahead and still apply to a bunch of such companies and such roles with as less effort as possible. And you can see a sample distribution graph of how my ranked companies were across different tiers. So like my tier 1 had 4 companies, tier 2 16 companies, so on. So I prioritized a lot of my time and focused a lot of my time on tier 1, tier 2 companies. Here's a sample of the metadata that you can use to rank your companies. I'll let you come back to this later as you're reviewing these slides to look at it. Now that you know which companies are important for you, start searching for potential champions in these target companies. These are folks who would be willing to recommend you to the companies or give you information to help you do better in your interviews. So target either champions in your companies of interests or champions who are in the role of your interest, product management, regardless of companies, because you'll get to learn from them. Primarily, although you'll search from LinkedIn, you can also search from Facebook, WhatsApp, family contacts, and that will help you reach a broader set. And how to reach this a broader set of champions. So there's like 4 tiers of potential how you'll reach out to folks. That first and easiest is already connected, first degree connections, and you know them. It's not just random people you keep clicking out on LinkedIn. Second is alumni from your jobs or universities. For example, for me, I look at UCLA alumni or ex Cisco, ex Qualcomm, so on. Then second degree connections, for which you would like to request an introduction from somebody who know them. And last is similar niche interests, like somebody who's also a martial artist or a pianist. I might reach out to them if they have mentioned this on their LinkedIn, and maybe explicitly call that out as a reason for me reaching out. Uh, there's a lot for you to remember, and it's not your job to remember a bunch of things. So you can use an Excel-based like CRM type tracker as to serve as your memory, and you can use a notebook or some app to take notes per call so that you know who taught you what. I'll let you look at this slide later on for the content in detail and the speaker notes. Once you know whom you want to reach out to, let's talk about how to reach out. And why is it important? Because even a 10% response rate is a pretty good response rate. Not everyone replies. People are busy. So one is to improve your response rate, follow up 1 to 2 times. If you email them today, 7 days later, follow up. 7 days further, follow up. Don't feel bad about following up, but also be mindful and write it out that I realize you might be busy and this might have missed. You don't want to call out that they didn't reply to you. You want to mention that I realize you're busy, so you might have missed seeing it. Things like that. So always talking about them in a positive light. If you're reaching out on LinkedIn, I'd suggest not reaching out directly with an ad request, instead preferring an email. LinkedIn has in general prioritized emails over ad requests or normal messages. And the benefit of an email is you can then follow it up with an ad request with a note. Reach out with three things: a genuine appreciation for their career trajectory or success, and an understanding that I realize you're super busy and I'll be grateful if you have any time available to talk. Third is remarking explicitly or implicitly on your similarities, whether it's the same company or like same engineering to product management, etc., etc. And always have in mind what is some outcome you want out of it. Either it's getting referred to their company, or learning about product management, or learning more about their company because you have an interview coming up. Now that you have reached out, you maybe have some informational interviews set up. How do you prepare for it? So prepare for the logistics and the content, while keeping in mind what's in it for them: getting praise and validation, satisfaction that you got some help out of it. So the logistics part, one is offer to share a calendar invite, but only do so if they agree for it. Otherwise, a lot of people maintain their own calendars. Prepare 10 to 15 questions so that you can jump to whichever are the relevant questions in the conversation. And on another aspect of logistics is to be mindful of the time limit. So at 29 minutes within the time, talk about being respectful of the time limit. And if you have more questions you want to cover, offer to talk about that at some other time. So that you also are getting more touch points. The more touch points you have with someone, the better bond you could build with them. But also each question needs to have a lot of thought put into it when you're asking it. Personalize it. Think of your experience related to it, or research why you want to ask it to this person and what's the question. For example, um, in my role, I realized that I try to prioritize it based on X, Y, and Z. But then I was reading about this or whatever, and I realized that you work in a role where there's probably a lot of competing priorities. How do you prioritize? So that's kind of the why is generic, but there's a lot of opportunities for you to make it more specific. Once you've reached out, you have the call set up, you have talked to them, you also want to be prepared to submit your application. So I would suggest building a single resume and deprioritizing cover letter. What to highlight in your resume? So I've written what I think is a product management lifecycle. How does a product lifecycle in general like happen? And it's iterative. So keeping this in mind, think like a product manager, and each of your bullets should be written as if you're a product manager already. Versus my initial resume, you sounded like I'm an engineer who also thinks about business or customers. Flipping it on its head and thinking I am a product manager. If I were a product manager, how would I have done that job? Writing it that way, while being genuine to your experiences. Also, keep a single resume As you keep reading more and more job descriptions, as you find out more keywords or skills you want to add to that same resume instead of having a few different resume for different flavors of product management. The better you can keep enhancing one, the more value you'll see out of it. Otherwise, you'll keep getting a lot of crisscrosses of different types of functions or skills you need to highlight in different resume. To highlight the skills, your education and extracurricular sections are also great opportunities for you to highlight skills apart from the work experience section. Now let's talk about applying to jobs. So to get job interviews, you want to increase the volume of your applications and you want to increase the selection rate. So to increase the volume of applications you do, apply to roles of plus minus one seniority, like apart from product manager, associate, and senior product manager, because recruiter hiring managers are open to adjusting the final role. They may not give you a more senior role, but they may adjust the final role to your seniority. And speed up your application by having pre-written summary. For example, you just keep seeing like what questions you keep getting asked again and again in job applications, and write down summaries for it so that you can keep copy pasting that. And why is all of this important? It's because the selection rate of submitting a resume is really low, like 5% or so. So you want to increase the likelihood of selection as well. Few ways you can do that. One is applying as soon as you can. Research suggests that if you apply to a job within 24 hours of it being posted, there's more likelihood for you to get an interview versus if you apply 7 days later. And how can you stay on top of the game? Have a bunch of notifications like you can do on LinkedIn, Indeed, Glassdoor, etc. I used to have two notifications, daily notifications, one for product manager jobs in your top 25 companies, another for like in locations of your interest and seniority, etc., etc. If you don't have a referral, don't think that you'll now reach out to somebody in that company, build a bond with them, show this link to them, wait for them to get back to you and refer you. Don't wait for them to apply. Same, and while referral helps you increase the odds of selection, resume is not a golden parachute. Doesn't If you apply through a resume doesn't mean you will get an interview. Um, but if and when you have a champion for a company and you find a job post, reach out to the champion immediately so that you can get a referral for the job post as soon as you can and apply as soon as you can. If they don't reply, follow the same follow-up rule for responses. And if they don't reply within 2-3 days, apply on your own externally. When they reply, you can then request them to internally follow up. That hey, I already applied externally. I didn't want to uh, keep waiting. Not really keep waiting, but like I didn't want to keep following up with you for that, and I didn't want to get delayed. But would you be able to reach out to the recruiter or the hiring manager to put in a word for me? That often helps. Those words I've often seen interviews pop up the minute my champions reached out to their recruiter or hiring manager. Lastly, there are tiers of recommendation. So, as I just mentioned, the recommending directly to the hiring manager is the most valuable and most impactful, followed by recommending but to the post internally, followed by without the recommendation but applying to the post, and lastly, a referral link which you're using to apply externally. And now that you have your uh, so we have now covered everything till you apply for interviews. Now let's talk everything about interviews, the next few slides. Let's start with usually the first call, the recruiter interview phone screen. You want to tailor your answers to the job description. What does this mean? If the job description says you should have had led products from concept to launch end to end, and you may not have had a complete experience. I would suggest not telling an answer. I haven't had that entire experience for a product, but I have led the concept in some and launch in some and this execution in some. Instead, remove everything before the but. Talk about across my experiences, I have led products from concept to launch. So that's how you connect because recruiters are not cannot rely on preparing or to sorry cannot rely on connecting the dots between your experience or like half of your experience versus what they want. And recruiters also cannot rely on I'll learn on the job. They need to see that you already have done the work. And how can you prepare like this for the recruiter calls? Apart from reading the job description, you want to be prepared for the call and not be caught unaware by a call in the middle of in the middle of your day. So I've put some tips here on the right hand side for you to see what will be handy for you to avoid picking up unknown recruiter calls and how you can identify or wait for their email or like follow up and then schedule the call. Other things that you can do to emphasize your candidacy is don't talk about compensation until you have an offer letter. Talk about being flexible. Don't give a range min or max for compensation. Nothing in your interviews. Be transparent of your competing timelines. If you're in other interviews and you need to get you'll probably get an offer within a week or two, or you want these interviews to also proceed quickly. Um, and if you're in the pipeline with other companies, feel free to mention that. Recruiters are trying to find whether you are in a lot of demand or not. So, and what's the pipeline? The entire Gantt chart you see at the bottom is the entire pipeline. So, if you are there in any stage of this with other companies, you can confidently say that you're in the pipeline with a few other companies. And the pipeline can even mean you have emailed somebody in a particular company to talk to them for at the outreach stage. Next, let's talk about behavioral questions. For behavioral questions, anchor your answers to your strengths. How do you do that? At the start of your interview, introduce yourself. At the end of your introduction, anchor it to your strengths. For example, and through these experiences, I've gained the strengths of A, B, and C, which will help me thrive or which will help me enjoy the role of product management at Twilio, and so on. So you're connecting the dots between your strengths and how they'll help you in this for the job that these interviews are for. And then all of your stories should keep building on these strengths. Um, and that'll and this anchoring, which means at the very start of the interview you're mentioning your strengths, helps the interviewer themselves subconsciously connect the dots between what answers you're giving versus what strengths you're told earlier. How to be structured like this in your answers. One is timing your answers to around 2 minutes. Second is following SAR or RSAR or TSAR formats. You might have heard of the diamond format. So let me talk about the directed diamond format. RSAR stands for starting with the result. For example, let me tell you about the time I reduced the go-to-market time by 15%. TSAR stands for thesis. I usually approach customer interviews by trying to understand why they are using what they are using and what are the needs, etc., etc. So it's a thesis of how you approach things. And then you explain the story. And you're timing your answer to 2 minutes, limiting it to around that time will help you be concise. Think of the most important things to highlight, and always keep it then open for the interviewer to ask you follow-up questions, which will help you steer the conversation in areas that are valuable for your interviewer and that you are already know well about. Another way for you to make best use of follow-ups is by thinking of your three most substantive, meaty, most heavy experiences, which cover a lot of bases for product management. So, whenever you think of the first few questions that you get in an interview, if you can bring up one of your substantive story and then be concise in your answer and then offer to follow up more, you can drive the interview in a direction that will benefit your and highlight your substantive experiences. Also, you can prepare a PM portfolio like slides to show your product management like accomplishments, and practice a lot. And but also realize that you'll grow from sounding unprepared and inexperienced to sounding over prepared and rehearsed to then sounding polished and well organized. So that dip might be there. Just go through it. Keep practicing. And in case questions, you can excel by showing innovation and structure. But these are two very hard things to do together. Think of like following a rigid structure. How can you also put in innovation into that? So that's where this slide comes in about building your innovation muscle. You can build that by having a spreadsheet of product ideas. Keep thinking about it every day. Think of 10x improvements on your favorite 10-20 products. And think of accessibility targeted ideas like a microwave for the blind, or if a kitchen stovetop for somebody in a wheelchair, etc., etc. That helps you keep thinking about what are the needs of a customer, how can they be met. Um, Also, learn more about what's possible, what's new by following tech news. That will keep helping you get a sense of what you can use in your product improvements. And over time, you'll realize that you have strengths and feature improvements of a similar type. For example, for me, it was machine learning based recommender engines because I had done a few roles related to machine learning. And I'd suggest staying away from M&A ideas because they do not allow you to flex your product muscle or innovation muscle. And about structure, I would suggest practicing to structure your answers. I have a sample structure down here, which I follow in my case questions, which I made after reading these two books. And I would suggest at the very start, writing each of these points below. Clarify users, needs, gaps, and like so you write all of that explicitly on paper or whiteboard, and then you look at the question, and then you make sure that you're covering each of these aspects. That will help you be structured and get used to the structure. You also want to be able to show your value to the company. So research about the company, research about the people, and research about all of that. After you know whom you're talking to, you know which company you're talking to. Three things you want to get out of it. Three reasons why to hire you for this company and team. Three ideas for this team to implement. Three recommendations to the CEO. Even for questions such as why do you want to join the company, focus on why you are great for the company and not just on why the company is great. Employees there likely believe that the company is great. You want to focus on why you are great for the company, which is where you are bringing some value in this interview and not regurgitating something which is already available online. But at the same time, how can you highlight your research into the company for the questions you see down there? It's by a bunch of these aspects that I mentioned here. So essentially doing a lot of company research. Also, to build a bond with your interviewer, think of similarities. Interviews are conducted by people. People are subjective. People like others who are more similar to them. Prepare a psyche profile of the interviewer, and the same thing holds true even for potential champions that you talk to, so that you can understand the similarities and you can then highlight these similarities to create a bond. If you don't know whom you're talking to, ask the recruiter. Last but not the least is about the hard skills that a product manager has. You can read a bunch of these books or ebooks that I liked. If you want to start with one book, I would suggest Marty Kagan's Inspired. Read about Agile and Scrum online. Read about basic tech concepts. There's a link here from Nikita's blog. And if you have questions, ask that in your informationals with product managers. All of this will also help you visualize your answers, behavioral answers, or case questions using frameworks, using 2D axis. For example, imagine a 2D axis where like one of it is the impact to your customers, and there is the effort involved. So if you, the more answer, the things you visualize, the more it will help you show that how you think like a product manager. So I hope that from all of this, you're able to take away the three P's: process, prioritize, prepare. Treat the job search as a marketing funnel. Help be more objective. Prioritize your efforts at each step based on your interests, and prepare for your informationals and practice for your interviews. Uh, Questions, or feel free to add to Slido. Coordinates to reach me are at harshalp.com, including these slides, including my newsletter. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help in any way I can. Thank you.